Hello and welcome to the one and only Iraq Football Podcast, ladies and gents. I think it's been quite an entertaining few weeks, I'm sure you'd agree with me. And I'm joined to discuss all the latest events with a plethora of wonderful guests today. I'm joined firstly by Hassan Osama. Hassan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be back. I say great, but it's been quite negative after two games. Lots of points of discussion. We'll break it down today.
I'm also joined by the wonderful Laith Naimi from Soccer Iraq. Laith, welcome to our show.
Habibi Hasnain, thanks for the wonderful introduction. It's great to be back.
No, it's a pleasure having you here as always. And of course, finally, I'm joined by Hassan Jabir. That's two Hassans and a Hassanin. Hassan Jabir from Yes to Iraq. Hassan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hassan. It's a pleasure to be here. I've always been a listener of this podcast, so it's great to be here.
It's a pleasure having you on. Now, listeners, there's a lot of Hassans going on right now, so try to bear with us. We'll figure out a way to coordinate things. But yeah, it's been quite an eventful couple of days, and I'm sure you're quite as miserable as I am. I think by having a plethora of ideas here, hopefully we can bring some logic and reason into the discussion, because if I'm honest with you, I'm still feeling frustrated, I'm still tired, and I'm still raging at the performance and the result. So let's get straight into things, ladies and gents. Iraq versus South Korea. We go into the game in Seoul. And in the last podcast, me and Hassan, we talked about Hassan Osama. The problems have started already. Me and Hassan Osama, we talked about our predictions, and we thought we can get away with a draw. And I think we did okay. It wasn't an amazing performance by any means, but we walked away with a fairly comfortable 0-0. They had that one chance where the attacker rockets it over after Sheko clears off the line. But other than that, it wasn't complete domination, in my opinion. They looked by far the better team, I'm not denying that. They looked way more comfortable in the ball, they had possession, but we weren't getting pummeled or battered. I think we held ranks fairly well. Hassan Jabir, let's start with you. What did you make of that performance?
So the first game against South Korea, it was the first official game for Dick Advocaat. I think he wanted to go in and play more of a defensive style to get to know the real performance and the real level of the Iraqi players. So the game being in South Korea against a giant in Asia, I think they played a defensive style, and it worked. A point for Iraq at the time, was a success, and we got that. Just looking at the stats from the game, you could tell that Iraq played more of a defensive style. He did kind of risk the playing Shirko in the right back position, if I do understand that correctly, and that was a huge risk for Iraq to sub Ali Mawi for Shirko, and it worked. And he got a lot of positive feedback. Iraq looked good, and we got a point from Seoul, and I think it was a success for us.
Hassan Osama, what was your initial response to the starting 11? So we talked about Shirko starting at right back. What did you make overall of the team selection?
Yeah, so I mean, there were some rumors initially that Shirko might feature at right back, just based off of the previous training camps. So it was interesting to see if he would actually commit to that and actually go with it. And it did work. The thing is, our normal right back, Ali Mawi, isn't, the best right back.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, so a change was kind of necessary. I wasn't sure that Shirko would actually do anything because, if you're converting a guy who's normally playing in wing or striker, switching to a defensive role is a big risk for sure. Aside from him, we were missing Safa Hadi as well due to injury. So that was also kind of a question mark there. He also took a risk bringing Amir al-Ammari, just starting him for his first ever game with the national team against South Korea.
3 days after he lands from Sweden, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So these are that's a risk that you're taking, and you're putting a lot of faith in the player. And he was repaid in terms of both of those risks. He was repaid by the players. Amir, he looked really good in his first game, and Shirko, he did well. There were some moments where it was a little bit shaky, which is understandable when you're moving an attacking player in a defensive position, where he's holding onto the ball a little bit too long, not passing it out of pressure. But it was a good experiment. Like, I think overall, the playing Shirko at right back, I think it worked. And overall, the lineup did exactly what I think Advocaat wanted it to do.
What did you make of Fahad Talib in goal? I think this is one of the areas of concern for us going into this game. No Jalal Hassan, who is, like, we've said this before on the podcast, he's our most important player. Because without him, it leaves a massive void. There's no one that could come in and replace him. You have Mohamed Hamid, who is also thankfully injured, who for some reason is the second choice, but in my opinion is a shambolic player. So Fahad Talib steps in, and at this point he's only got 5 appearances, despite being quite old relative to the other players in the team. So what did you make of his performance?
Fahad Talib, like, it's hard to make out like what his real level is. I remember one of the last games that he played, which was against Nepal, didn't look good.
I have to say, that was one of the worst performances I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the 2 goals we considered due to him was unforgivable in my opinion, and that's one of the reasons I was so worried going into these 2 games that he was going to be our primary goalkeeper. But was it as bad as I was fearing, or do you think he did all right?
Against South Korea, looked good. I think overall did everything that he needed to be, everything that you want from your goalkeeper. Didn't look too bad. Nothing extraordinary, but he wasn't called to make any extraordinary saves. So it's a good performance. But again, like when you have games with like that he had against Nepal, and then you have another game where it's like a good performance, so it's hard to judge. Like, should he be our starting goalkeeper? Should he be our absolute our second goalkeeper or whatever? It's really hard to really know. I'd liked him in the past, but then I feel like he's kind of an inconsistent goalkeeper. I don't know. The main thing is I prefer always Jalal. I don't love him as a player, but I think he's the best we've got, and we should stick with.
Yeah, that's assuming he comes back and he's fit for the next round, and hopefully that's going to be the case. Leith, I want to ask you a question regarding the South Korea game. Who were the standout performers for you? Like, I know it wasn't an amazing performance in terms of like attacking fluidity and creativity, but who stood out to you in that game?
Look, I think like most Iraq fans, it was a week of mixed emotions. But starting with the Korea game, I have to say I was very happy. I mean, that was the result we probably all wanted. We weren't going to realistically go away there and win. In Dick Advocaat's first game in charge, 10 minutes in, I was very sceptical. I wasn't too sure of the strategy. But as the game went on, I thought, here we go. He has got a style of play in which it's not pleasing on the eye, but if you want to grind out a result, which we have to do, then you'll take it. So at the end of the game, I was delighted with that point. And when I look at the standout players, I would say Shirko, being converted into a fullback, it was a wise decision. Now, I don't know if this was a Dick Advocaat move or it came before him, but he looked more suited to that role than higher up in the pitch. I actually did think Fahad Talib played well, and obviously the Iran game sort of overshadowed that for him, but he kept a clean sheet against South Korea, against Heung-min Son, who we kept him quiet for the majority of that game. The chance they missed, the big one, that was one of the worst blunders I think I have seen in a long time from close range. I don't know how he missed that, but overall I thought it was just the perfect result, and we got off to a flying start. It was of course a shame, which we'll talk about later on, that we didn't follow on and build on that, but to really answer your question, I would say Shirko. I was impressed with the goalkeeper. I actually liked Ahmed Ibrahim's performance against South Korea, and again, going back to Dick Advocaat, how he singled him out. I don't know if you listened to this at the end of the game. He said in his press conference, man of the match to Ahmed Ibrahim, which I thought was just a good player-manager relationship to have, because he looks like quite a tough figure on the sidelines. And then the boy from Sweden, Amari, who came in, what a performance to make his international debut on that stage in Seoul. He didn't put, for me, a foot wrong from what I watched. So, yeah, if you were to ask me what would have been the dream start, it would have been 4 points. Realistically, 1 point away to South Korea, and then the 3 against Iran, because our record, as much as they are a giant of the Asian game, our record is usually quite good against them. So that was, of course, disappointing. But loads of matches obviously upcoming for us in the qualification, and I love Dick Advocaat's quote about treating them all as cup finals, because I think in this stage I'm not really bothered about seeing pretty glamorous football. I just want to see Iraq finally progress to a World Cup.
Well, if you're not after glamorous football, then this Iraqi team is going to actually make sure you don't see anything like that.
Can I mention one other player? I forgot to say against South Korea. Ayman Hussein up front. That role to begin with, isolated up there, it's a graveyard shift, to be honest. And he looked comfortable. He looked good. He held it up well with bringing other players into the game, particularly in the second half. Again, I was wanting to see Mohammed from the off, but when the game went on, he was another impressive performer. So, yeah, I think it's fair to give him a shout out. But the Iran game has just brought more negativity into the camp, and that's kind of what's overshadowing my thoughts at the minute.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before we jump into the Iran game, I think the South Korea game, I think you're right. Like, you could see kind of signs of what Advocaat is trying to create, and you can see a lot of positivity, but there was one big problem for me, which was the lack of cohesion in terms of how we attack. And for me, this really was a concern. And it wasn't surprising seeing our performance against Iran. Now, I'm not sure why we've regressed so much in this manner, but I think it's one area I want us to kind of discuss today as a group. I want to hear your thoughts on it, because this has been something that's really been frustrating me over the last couple of weeks. I was with the Iraq under-23 squad. They played against the UAE, 2 friendlies, and 7 expats were joined, including the likes of Johan Zaytouna, all the way from Mexico. You had Zidane Iqbal here from Manchester United. There was Hiran over from Thun, from Switzerland, amongst other players, Nadim Costa, etc., etc. And I was there watching, I was literally with them on the bench, and I was watching this game pan out. And what was evident to me was that the problems that were present in the first team are present in the exact same manner in the under-23 team. And then I remember also a couple of months ago, we were all sat here watching Ahmad Mohammed's under-17 side. Or was it the under-20 side? Regardless, the problems are consistent throughout all of Iraqi football, and it makes you wonder, what are we doing fundamentally wrong that we face these problems throughout all manners of Iraqi football, including the league. So I want us to come back to this point, but we'll save this post-Iran game once we analyse that game. So, any final thoughts on the performance versus South Korea, Hassan?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about the stats briefly. Most of, I guess, portions of the Iraqi population didn't get to watch the game. I want to discuss the rights to watch the game and how messy it was for most people. I mean, a lot of people wasted a lot of time downloading apps and so on. But to talk about the stats, just looking at it here, if you look at the stats, we didn't play a good game at all. We're talking shots, 15 for South Korea, 2 for Iraq. Out of the 2, 0 were on target. where 5 were on target for South Korea. Possession-wise, it's almost 70% for South Korea, 30% for Iraq. And then to answer your question, in terms of what we're doing fundamentally wrong, if you look at the passes, we had 255 passes compared to 529. So South Korea had double the number of passes, where their pass accuracy was 86%, and we had 60%. So just looking at the stats, A, we didn't keep the ball, so possession-wise. B, when we did have the ball, when we made passes, it was half the amount of passes from South Korea. And even then, the accuracy of those passes were not, accurate. So you're talking 60%. There's a 40% chance when the player makes the pass, they're going to lose the ball. So if we just stop at the stats and, take a look at them, we feel like we played a good game. But in reality, if that one shot, that one miss that South Korea had, you would have had 0 points from both games and played a very, very bad game. And we'll talk about the Iran-Iraq stats shortly. But I just wanted to make to put a stop here and to talk about the stats from the South Korea game. We did not play a good game. We did get lucky with that one shot. It was Advocaat's first game, so we felt like we accomplished something by gaining a point. But I think we did get lucky that day.
That's a very interesting take, and I want to just throw the idea that maybe sometimes you have to play defensive. Maybe sometimes you have to kind of sit back and absorb the pressure and play on the counter-attack. And I think Iraq did that. Well, we absorbed the pressure well. We held a fairly good defensive line. I don't remember South Korea having that many attacking opportunities. They had 15 shots, but not many of them were very clear-cut and dangerous. There was that chance. The only other chance that really springs to mind was that header that landed straight at Fahad Talib. He nearly made a gaff out of it, but he gathers it very quickly and he kind of fixes his error. But I don't think we got completely battered. The problem for me in that game was the lack of attacking intent, the lack of the chemistry and cohesion. I was watching that game with a professional footballer whose name I'm not going to mention, but I told him, what do you think of this performance? And he said something that was very profound because it was so true. He said, it's like watching 11 trialists play in a team. Like it looks like they've never played football before in the same team. They weren't aware of each other's movement. They weren't aware of a plan of attack. They would pass the ball, they would pass it again, and then the third pass, the ball would get lost. Usually under no real pressure. I mean, Iran and South Korea, they're both fit players. They both press as a team, but the players would lose it under the first bit of pressure, or quite usually and often, just because of poor decision making. So going forward, we really offered nothing, and this is not a new problem. People want to come in and talk about, this is Dick Advocaat, etc. I was talking to a football player from the Iraqi national team just yesterday, actually, and I was talking to him, telling him, what do you think of this performance? And he talks about like the lack of creativity going forward, the lack of actual flair, and the lack of chances being created. And I told them, this is nothing new. If we look back at the last couple of games, so we had before this match, these two games, before Iraq and Iran and Iraq and South Korea, we played Iran where we lost 1-0. Did we create any real chances then? No. Before that game, we played against Hong Kong. Did we create any real chances then? No. We scored from an own goal. That's 4 games, by the way. We've not scored a single goal. If excluding that own goal, which would be embarrassing to even claim was our goal, if I'm honest with you. So what was the game before that? The game before that was against Cambodia, where we scored a couple. And even that performance was terrible, by the way. In case anyone who doesn't remember that game, that was a terrible performance. But is that really the standard that we're going to be scoring at when we're playing the likes of Cambodia? But when it comes to actually facing decent teams like Iran and South Korea and semi-decent teams, and that's being generous, Hong Kong. Like, is that really what Iraq is about as a national team? Because that's not good enough. We're here trying to qualify for the World Cup, but imagine this team going to the World Cup. Wallah, it's embarrassing. Like, I hate saying that. I would die to see this Iraqi team in the World Cup. I would be the first one there in the stadium. But part of me thinks, man, thank goodness we don't qualify. Because if we did, we would be humbled and embarrassed, given the way we've been playing recently. If you go into that tournament, let's say in this weird dimension, we end up qualifying, playing some of the players we have in the current squad, it's scary thinking about what would happen if these guys actually faced proper footballers. Imagine this team facing Italy, or Brazil, or Argentina, or whoever. And before I say any more, I think let's go into the Iraq-Iran game and let's dissect this game in a bit more detail and a bit more depth, guys. Laith, what did you make of that that performance against Iran? 3-0 in our so-called home game.
Well, where do I start? I have to say the negative mindset that I had early on in the podcast, I would say is true when it comes to a game like South Korea away from home. You have to be fair and understanding of Dick Advocaat's position. He's just in the door. It's a very tough first game away from home, and that's the only time I'm allowing and understanding that approach in terms of trying to get a point and being very defensive. However, when you then look at Iran, you've managed to defend for your lives in the first game, earn yourself a point. But when we go and play Iran, a team who I wouldn't say are, of course, their international record speaks for itself, but they're not on a completely different level to us, or they shouldn't be. So that's the type of match where you would like to properly see a more progressive approach, an attacking style, or just a game plan. But it was touched upon earlier when you said, Hassan, I think it was, talking about the stats and their pass accuracy and where the goals were coming from. That was completely clear to see against Iran. I just felt that it wasn't the defeat in itself, it was the manner and how we lost the game. There was no belief, there was no tactic. We conceded a horrible goal to start the game, and as much as I praised Fahad for his first match against South Korea, that was helpless. I thought he was very poor for that goal. And then moving on, we just didn't seem to have a way in which we organised ourselves to break Iran down. There was definitely no style. So that was worrying. And I have to say, after that performance, I started to look at the table and the upcoming fixtures, and I lost all hope, because you look at the squad. You mentioned that about the trialists playing together. It did look like that, and particularly against Iran. I can cut them slack against South Korea, but for Iran, you think, get another point or go all out, show us something going forward, and they really didn't offer that. So it was an extremely disappointing result, but even more so the way in which we started the game. I was not happy whatsoever, and looking forward to the games ahead. I really don't know where we go from here.
I think I'm in the same boat where I don't know where we go. Like I'm sat here watching, and like people asking me, people turn to me for comfort and assurances, and the truth is I can't give it, because like I know better than most people, having talked to so many players within the game, having been to games at all stages, and watching Iraq with so much detail that it actually you kind of see the problems more so than the average fan who just watches the big games. And like I want to tell people, no, don't worry, it's going to be all right. Oh no, don't worry, we still have a good chance of qualifying. But the truth is, it's looking very, very bleak. Now, Laith, you mentioned something that's interesting, and I think I disagree with you on this point. where you talked about how Iran, and I'm interested to see what the other Hassans think of this. You guys talked about, Laith, you talk about how Iraq did well against South Korea because they're a better team, but you wanted us to do better against Iran because we're on the same level. I think we're nowhere near that level, if I'm honest with you. I think Iran are, I think maybe on ranking just below Japan, but I think Iran are a very, very, very strong team, and we are nowhere near that level. In fact, I'd argue that we are, if not the weakest team in the final stage of the World Cup qualifiers, maybe second weakest. So if you look at, for example, Oman, usually you'd expect Iraq to be Oman, but bro, like Oman played against Japan the other day and won. They're organized defensively. They can attack. They create chances. Talk about Syria. Syria the other day played 2 games. They didn't get the results, but they can actually attack. They don't concede too many goals. They have a disciplined team. If you look at them, you know what to expect as a style. UAE, not an incredible team, but there is a identity to their team. You know they can pass the ball. You know that they're fluid in how they move going forward. They play touch and pass, etc. This was also the case, by the way, with their under-23s. Their under-23s are very, very, very good. And the fact that they beat Iraq twice wasn't surprising. What was surprising is how much better they were compared to our squad and our team in terms of cohesion and mannerisms and how they play. That was what was really shocking. And who else is there? You have South Korea, better than us. Iran, better than us. UAE, my opinion, better than us. Syria, I'd argue, are better than us, if not same level. Lebanon, you'd expect us to beat. But wallah, with this team, you never know. You never know. Based on that performance, you never know. Now, I'm going to hand this over to Hassan Osama or Hassan Jabir. Am I being crazy? Am I being way too harsh in this assessment? Or is this actually the truth and a lot of Iraqi fans just don't want to admit it? Hassan Jabir, what do you think?
I sort of agree with you. So I agree with the first part of it where you said we don't compare to Iran. Again, I think I've had that talk with you offline about this, so I want to raise it here. I think we're just a very emotional group of people or population, where when you tie South Korea, you kind of have a very clear road to the World Cup, and then 4 or 5 days later, when you lose to Iran, hell broke loose, and you're the worst team, and even Syria and Lebanon might be better than you. So I think we're just and it's not just you or me, it's everybody. That's the problem. It's starting from Adnan Darjad as a minister, to the media, to the fans, to the players. I think we're just very emotional, and that's really the fundamental problem that we have. We're not realistic. That's kind of why I mentioned stats, because if you do look at stats, we're not a giant in Asia. We've never been a giant in Asia. Again, going back to stats, South Korea has made it to the World Cup 10 times so far in their history.
They've reached a semi-final.
In 1986. I'm sorry?
They've even made it to a semi-final, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly, and they made it to us, and they got fourth position from fourth place in 2000. They hosted a World Cup. Forget about, just in terms of organization. So South Korea never missed a World Cup since 1986, which is when we made it. If you think about that alone, you can think of all the work that has gone in terms of organization, consistency, level of players. Like, I mean, you have, one of their key players plays for Tottenham. So that's number one. That's South Korea. Iran, same thing. They've made it 5 times. They tied Portugal in the World Cup, the last World Cup. They beat Morocco. They have 4 points. And to be honest, I want to say this in Arabic because because we made it to the World Cup in 1986, and we scored 1 goal, right? And we never made it to the World Cup after that. And number two is even the Asian Cup that we won. It was a lot of players, even Nishat Akram admitted that it was pure luck that we won. And again, conditions in Iraq at the time, the sectarian problems and so on kind of motivated the players. But going back to the discussion here, we're very emotional. I think we need to look at the stats. We are not a giant in Asia. We would be very lucky if we make it to the World Cup in Qatar. I think this group that we have right now, not players, but group as nations in our group, would be the easiest to make it to the World Cup. Just like it was in 1986. I believe we played Qatar and we played Syria at the time to go to the World Cup. We didn't play Japan, South Korea, and so on. So it's just a reminder to everybody to stay realistic. We are not the worst team, but we're not top 4, 5, or 6 probably. We do need a lot of work in terms of, helping, coaches that properly manage younger teams within Iraq, under 17, under 20. You need to build that, play to start seeing the change in Iraqi football. But right now, the defense gets the ball, shoots it to Ayman, Hussein, or Mimi, and yalla, and Allah, hopefully they can score it. That's not a way to make it to the World Cup. One last comment about this is playing at home is very critical if we want to make it to the World Cup. We've seen that when Iraq played Iran and Jordan, and thousands of people saw that game in the stadium. There was a change, and there was a win that we got from that. From what I'm hearing, it may not be possible for us to play any home games during this qualifiers. And there might have been portion of the contract with Advocaat where he never actually has to coach Iraq in Iraq. So maybe that's something we can discuss today or in future podcasts. But I think that's very critical. If the coach is aware that he doesn't have to coach the team in Iraq, including the Gulf Cup that Basra is hosting. I think that's a huge thing that kind of explains to you that maybe even Advocaat doesn't have that much faith in reaching the World Cup. And again, sticking to the facts, if it is within the contract, talk and media talk is different. So a lot to talk about, but I just wanted to chime in and remind everybody to think realistically and not emotionally when it comes to Iraqi football, because we've never been a giant. And at this rate, unless we fix the younger generations in Iraqi football, we will not be a giant in the future.
No, I completely agree with you. This is one of the reasons I raised this, because again, like people talk about us like we're up there with Japan and Iran and South Korea and Australia and even now Qatar, for example, and Saudi. I don't think we're anywhere near that level. Anywhere near that level. People like to talk about the players that Iraq produces, etc. If you look at like all aspects of Iraqi football, it is in disarray. It's in shambles. If you look at the Iraqi league, it's not proper football. Like I know we like to pretend that it's this amazing league that produces talents, etc. But not really. You could count on one hand the good talents that have come from the Iraqi league over recent years. You have the likes of, for example, Bashar, Safat, Mimi, Ali Adnan, and that's really about it. And even like these players, Ala Abbas is another one. These players who have actually made it out of the Iraqi league and gone on to have somewhat of a career in Europe. But like we talk about these guys, they're the pinnacle of Iraqi talents, and these guys have all gone abroad, and nearly all of them have failed. Some would argue that all of them have failed. And if you compare that, for example, to the Iranian side, which was a plethora of attacking talent from all aspects of European football. You have Ali Raza, you have Tarimi, you have, for example, Sadar, you have the goalkeeper whose name I can't remember right now. These guys are all, not just in Europe, doing very well as well. Like, for us to sit here and talk about, the Iraqi league produces talents, etc. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If it did, we wouldn't be in anywhere near the misery we are in now. And I know, Hassan, you talk about us being emotional, but I kind of feel that in the way we lost, some of that is actually justified. And I don't blame the fans for being angry. I don't blame the fans for being frustrated. And I don't blame the fans for being disgusted as well with some of these players. Because I've talked about this in the last podcast, like this whole idea of ghira, right? We talk about ghira. Okay, ghira is not that you're born in Iraq. Ghira is that when you put on this shirt, you give everything. Ghira is that you're prepared to sacrifice everything to represent your country. Even if, for example, you're Justin Miram and you take a 24-hour flight to make it to the national team and you have to play after basically a day of training. That to me, that's true ghira. Not, oh yeah, I'm born in Iraq and Ibn Dijla wal Farat and all that nonsense. But you know what? You can't actually pass a football. You can't actually control the ball under pressure. You have zero tactical awareness, etc., etc. That's not ghira to me because you're not looking to develop yourself. But a part of me, I agree with you. I think as Iraqi fans, we are very reactive, and I think we get annoyed very, very quickly. But I think this time, I think a lot of it was justified, man. Like it was a disgraceful performance. Like there's no other way to describe it. The way those players turned up to that game was unforgivable. Not all of them. I think some players can actually um, look at their performance and think, "Do you know what? Like, what more can I have done?" But I'm talking about maybe one or two players there. I think generally that performance was a disgrace.
Can I just make a quick point before we move on? I agree wholeheartedly with both of your comments, Hassan. The level comment was perhaps unfair. What I'm thinking, when you come across a team like Iran at an international level, and you are their neighbours, and you have a strong head-to-head record, when you look at the last 5 meetings before the defeat, there was only one game in which we lost. So perhaps we're going in with hope, but I think the head-to-head record there is very strong. Whereas with South Korea, especially away from home, it's a complete opposite. And as well as that, we do have to be respectful of a team of Iran's quality. You mentioned there Mehdi Taremi scoring goals in the Champions League, not just playing, as well as Sardar Azmoun, the other boy that scored against us, I can't remember his name, playing in the Premier League, or played in the Premier League, yeah. So
playing for final now.
Of a very high standard, which we don't have. We have a couple of players with stints in Europe or the West, and they very rarely produce the goods, unfortunately. So I think in that sense, it's more frustration. The emotion side was a surprise for me not to see on the pitch, because when we come up against Iran, a lot of the time it's momentum that gets us the points or the win. And then the other night, we played with no battle, no fight. And I think that was one of the biggest surprises from my end watching on. And then finally, a quick point about the manager. The frustration some fans had on South Iraq channels that I looked at following the game was that, here we go, it's his first defeat. We were negative against South Korea, albeit everyone was celebrating. But the one time we lose under Dick Advocaat, fans are saying he's here for a payday, which he may well be. But it's hard to say at this stage. And the most sort of the biggest difficulty that we're going to have with the Advocaat is the only time we'll be able to judge him is at the end of this World Cup qualification round, which will dictate whether or not we're in Qatar next year. So it's going to be hard for him as quickly as he had those 2 games to implement his style. But he did have 2 or 3 training camps beforehand. But you're not going to fully test yourself out until you're on the 11-a-side pitch playing a competitive game. So it might be too late before we realise it was a poor decision. He came out of retirement to take the job, so there are labels there that he's only in it for the money. Hard to tell right now, but the last performance was definitely not one in which we're looking at with optimism going ahead.
I think that training camp is what made this so frustrating for me out of anything. I think so. This guy, Dick Advocaat, comes in and he has nearly a month with, I think maybe under a month. I think that's a bit harsh, but he has a couple of weeks of intense training with this squad in Marbella and then in Turkey, playing 4 friendlies. A lot of videos were leaked, a lot of rumors were leaked, a lot of information was leaked. Videos were shared as well online, pictures of how intense this training is, how organized it is, players talking about how it's never happened before in this kind of manner where the team is actually training properly and in a modern style. Then you turn up to the Iran game and none of that is evident. In fact, like I said, it looked like, a trial match. It looked like 11 players who had never played football together. It's like they just turned up and they're just playing for jokes. Like it wasn't a serious football match. We say in Iraqi, it looked like a group of lemloom where you just gather a few players and you just bring them together. Yalla shabab, bring a football, we'll meet at this park, let's go play some football. It didn't look like a professional performance. And the worst bit is that, like, if you look at that team, yeah, if you look at, for example, Ali Faiz, if you look at, for example, Dhurgham, Ali Adnan, Safa, Mimi, to a certain degree, Ayman Hussein as well. Who else do you have in that squad? Amjad Atwan. These players are generally from the same generation. Like, these guys have played Humam as well. These guys are not like you have one old player, one young player, and these guys have never played together. These guys have played dozens of games together. And you would never have thought, like, if you were a neutral fan watching that, I can't even imagine what you would have thought of that Iraqi performance. I mean, I spoke to Arya from Golbazan, a friend of our podcast, and he goes, I couldn't believe it. Like, the worst bit is that the lack of heart, the lack of intent, the lack of desire, which is usually the only thing these players can actually claim they have. Because God knows it's not talent, but it's this whole idea, again, I go back to this idea of a ghira, and these players giving 110% and they're ready to die for the shirt. Where was that? It wasn't there against Iran. And it was just so frustrating to watch. I mean, Hassan Osama, what did you make of that performance? What were your thoughts? What were the things that disappointed you most, etc.?
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I'll start off by saying this. Like, after the first game, like we started, like I think we started reasonably well with these first 2 games against South Korea. 1 point in Seoul, very good. The second game we started off, I think we kind of killed ourselves right from the beginning, and this kind of painted the picture for the whole game when we conceded the goal after 2 minutes played. I think that was the point of no return for us at that, and I think it kind of like it makes, in my opinion, this game a little bit different from like if it was like any other game kind of like you could play this game like over and over and over, and I don't think it would be played like 3-0 every single time. I think we just killed ourselves right away, and the players didn't know how to react. Attack wise, we have 0, and that's known for a while, and I think the warning signs were there from the training camp when we played against 2 third division sides in Spain, and we drew with them twice 0-0, I think. That's right away the warning sign. We should have seen that, how ineffective we were going to be moving in attack.
I'd argue, Hassan, sorry, I'd argue the warning signs were way before that. I mean, me and you, we've had this podcast. Yeah. We've discussed how important a player like Jilwan would be to come in, someone that could create chances. It's not just now that we can't attack. Even before. Yeah.
I mean, like more in terms of like since we had just changed coaches, we were all hopeful that things would be different in that sense. The thing is, like, I think our players just like mentally, like a lot of the players mentally, we've seen a mental weakness in this game that where it's like, they tried in the second half to try to like create attacks, but there was nothing working. No passes working, no movement. I think it's like they were kind of like defeated after the first 2 minutes, playing dead, and the game was over right away.
But Hassan, that sort of thing, I get what you're saying, but that sort of thing shouldn't happen with a squad that experienced. Like if that happened to let's say a group of young players, let's say if our squad were all like 21, 22, and it was a kind of a young generation that we're bleeding through, I'd be like, yeah, that's understandable. They haven't got a leader, they haven't got anyone to guide them through, to calm them down, etc. If you look at that squad, that is not a young squad. If you look at, for example, the likes of Humam, Durgham, these are players that should be at their prime. You look at Ahmed Ibrahim, another experienced player, Ali Faiz. I mean, I know like their fake ages make them young. These guys are not young. These guys are all like 27, 28. These guys should be like at the prime of their football. But, they concede one goal within 2 minutes and then completely capitulate. I mean...
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think this is kind of a symptom of Iraqi football for a long time, where it's like, if you concede early, you concede in the first half, we're done. And I think this has been kind of the case for quite a few years, no matter the coach. And I think it's hard to come back. And games like the one, I guess, from way back in the 2015 Asian Cup, when we were coming back and forth with Iran, those are complete outliers. And, generally speaking, we concede first, we're going to lose. Or at best, find a tie like we did in the last round with Bahrain. I think, especially it didn't help either. When we're missing someone like Ali Adnan, I think he's a major leader in the team. Even if he hasn't played with his club for such a long time, I think he's absolutely vital, and we saw why Katanec and also Advocaat, they play him no matter what. Even if Barham is ready, we have another player ready. Ali Adnan plays regardless, because I think he's vital in the team. And just overall, I don't really like to go too hard into the players, because at the same time, these are the same guys who beat Iran in the last round. Right just before we tied with Korea, it was a kind of it's like we were all happy. So it's like one game later, and then the sky is falling. I don't really agree that we should go to that extent. But there's problems with the national team, and it's a broken record at this point that we all know, where our problems are. And I don't think, anybody should be under any delusions that qualifying for the World Cup was ever going to be something that we should expect. It was always going to be a distant kind of hope. The problems in Iraqi football are just so deep that you're not going to fix it in 1 year. You're not going to fix it in 2 years or 5 years. It's something that it's
systematic. It's systematic. The problems are systematic in our not just our football, in our society. If I'm honest with you, it's the lack of forward planning, the lack of actual development. I'm not sure what the word is in English, but it's a thing about thaqafa, and I think generally, للأسف, we lack that thaqafa to actually plan for the future and look at the long-term impact of our actions. It's constantly us looking at short-term solutions, etc. And yeah, you're right. There's so much wrong that I can't even sit and talk about where we start. So to be fair, that's why I brought you guys here. So guys, that brings me to my next question. Laith, go on. What do we do now?
It's just one of the points that you mentioned, Hassan, earlier about Oman. I mean, what a result that is. Away to Japan to win 1-0. That is incredible. And then you look at the other teams that have started over the last 5 to 10 years advancing in Qatar, Emirat.
Even the likes of Thailand and Vietnam. Honestly, in the group stages that we just finished, man, they looked so good, so much better than anything we saw 5 years ago. And then it just
beat Vietnam by a goal,
and it makes
exactly that. I was in Qatar recently, and I seen the amount of money they've been pumping into the country. Obviously, they've got the World Cup coming up, but even the Aspire Academy. I I'm sure that was way before they even put in a bid for the World Cup. I don't fully agree with how they go about their business over there and bringing in players from other regions and then making them utterly citizens, albeit the intention is from grassroots to revamp the structure. And we've all spoken about this time and time again, but we are so backwards as a nation. The HQ in Baghdad, whoever's calling the shots, they're not thinking about it. They will look at building new stadiums as a way in which, we're developing the game. No, we don't need new stadiums. We really don't. We're not bidding for an Asian Cup or a World Cup right now. We are trying to solve out our own national team problems, and that starts from the youth.
Absolutely, it starts in grassroots, and that brings me back to the point you mentioned earlier, Laith, which is regarding Qatar. Now, Qatar have, one of the most famous academies in all of Asia called Aspire. I know numerous Iraqi coaches that actually teach in this academy, and the reason they're there is that they have opportunities to go and make a living and do what they love. Why are these guys not able to go to Iraq and get job opportunities there? Who's developing the players in Iraq? Because God knows it's not the clubs that are currently there. Why are there no grassroots level academies developing young players, giving them opportunities to actually play games from a young age, etc.? Instead, no, we're going complete opposite. We rely on tazweer, we rely on klawat basically, and we're not really going to go anywhere with that, as we have seen over the last 3-4 decades. So it's a really painful situation where we're discussing this, but there's so much that needs to change. We've talked about bringing in expat players, we've talked about bringing in foreign coaches, we've talked about bringing in all sorts of different solutions. The problems are far, far bigger than anything that we've discussed, and we've provided a solution. We need to go back to the core, and we need to invest money and time into developing young footballers. Because the players right now, they're fundamentally designed incorrectly. It's a weird way to explain it, but at the core of what they know about football, their essence is incorrect. They're used to a style of football that is backwards in terms of getting the ball and lumping it forward. And not just, there's nothing wrong with direct football, but you need to be good at it. They're not even good at that style of football that they play in Iraq. So this is the thing, you bring in the likes of Justin, and you bring in the likes of Osama Rashid or Zidane Iqbal at the younger levels. There's only so much these players can do when every single ball that goes to the midfield is flying 50 yards above his head. What's he going to do? People had so much to say about Justin Miram in the last game. Do you know what? Justin Miram, wallah, he was the only player trying to create something when he came on. He lost the ball a few times, but a creative player is going to lose the ball a few times. Whether you're Cristiano Ronaldo or Bruno Fernandes or Justin Miram, Not to compare him to them, I'm not doing that, but I'm saying a creative player will take risks with the ball and he will lose it. I'd much rather that than the likes of Humam Tariq, who, as we saw for the second goal, loses the ball to nobody, literally under zero pressure. He has an opportunity to pass to the left, to come back, to cross it, and it's the lack of footballing IQ. He doesn't know what to do with the ball. He doesn't know where to be on the pitch. He doesn't know when to pass, when to shoot, when to make any correct decisions. And it all goes back to the foundations in which these players were taught football. And unfortunately for us, they were taught football incorrectly. So it results in there being this continuous problem right from youth level, under 17s, the under 20s, to the under 23s, all the way to the national team. If you look at other teams, you can see an identity or a level of IQ in their play. As I was with the UAE under 23s, man, they get the ball, they touch and move, and one-touch football, and they had a Spanish coach, and they just looked like such a team. I know some people are here listening saying, oh, they do tazweer, this and that. Do you know what? I don't care, okay? That under-23 team plays better football than our first team. I don't care what you say. They actually play football. Our first team, Tazweer or not for the under-23s, our first team cannot play that style of football. They cannot play that level of intricate passing and touch and move and pressing and coming back into formation, moving across the pitch to press and coming across, etc. We don't have any of that, and like that, this is something that cannot be taught by Advocaat or Katanich or whoever. You could bring Alex Ferguson back from retirement, and he cannot fix this problem because the manager comes in with a week's worth of training. He's not going to sit and teach these players how to press, how to pass the ball. No, he's got to tactically look at the situation and look at how he can best use these players to his advantage, as we saw in the Korea game. But if the players are fundamentally flawed in their abilities, then there's only so much a manager can do, and changing that manager is going to do. But yeah, like I was watching that and it was so frustrating, man. Like it was very, very heartbreaking.
Yeah, like the thing is, like over these last two games, we saw like completely kind of two different versions of Iraq, but also kind of a lot of similarities between the two defensive structures, but one where we completely fell apart. So for me personally, I don't know how I can like really judge what we're going to see going forward. We don't know if it's going to be more of the same with Iran or more of the same against Korea. It's hard to say, and these next several games are going to be absolutely vital for that. The most important thing is that Advocaat has a lot of work to do in terms of like player selection, in terms of how he wants to set up his team, whether he wants to go 5 at the back or if he wants to continue 4 at the back. These are considerations that he's going to have to take in for the next games. It's going to be also another consideration that like these next few games, like you've got to get wins. You got Lebanon, you got
UAE.
You got to win. We have 2 games, 1 point from 2. Not awful because it's against the 2 best teams by far in the group. But this is the point where you got to start scoring goals. You got to start getting points. Put yourself in a good position. We'll see how things go from there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think now it's make or break. If we don't get sufficient points, and I'm talking about at least 4, it really should be aiming for 6 though in these next games. I think it's going to be very, very difficult after that. Even if we're talking about playing for 3rd place, which 3rd place is quite difficult to make it through, even if you achieve a 3rd place. So there's a lot to do. I completely agree with you. Laith, final thoughts?
I'm really going to echo both your thoughts there in terms of the next 2 games, must-wins. Dick Advocaat has been landed the toughest start away to South Korea, Iran. They are the best teams in the group. So did he go all out negative in the hope of 2 points? Possibly. Did we have a strategy after Iran scored early on? No, which was, again, alarm bells were ringing after that. But a bit more time, hopefully, to reflect, look at the squad, and what we need is some new additions. As well as that, I don't want to see the same formation for the next 2 must-win matches, because if he goes down that route, then we could maybe end up with 1-2 points. That's it, the dream's over again. So, yeah, hopefully a bit more attacking with a clear game plan rather than just sit back. And I think, that's my final thoughts.
What would your formation be? So, I mean, after the Iran game, Dick Advocaat came out and said, I don't know if he was like taking the mick or whatever, but he goes, I now understand why Iraq play with 5 at the back. So is that what you would want to see in the next game, or how do you think we should approach them?
I actually think we need another outlet up front. I think I would like to see us play with either a 4-4-2 type formation or a 3-5-2, something that's just a bit more modern, making the wide players be of use, take advantage of an extra man up front and just have that link-up play, because at the moment, even Hussein against South Korea, absolutely understandable him being isolated up there, in my opinion. But going forward, no, I would much rather see us just have some more attacking options.
Hassan, Jabir, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, to talk about the future games, I think we all know that we played the toughest two teams in the group. And if the next game against Lebanon and against UAE, if we don't get the 6 points, I disagree with the 4 points. If we don't get the 6 points, I don't think we deserve to be in the World Cup. If you can't beat Lebanon, Syria, Emirat, I don't think we need to go. We shouldn't go to the World Cup, because it's going to be very embarrassing. The World Cup is happening in just over a year, from actually under a year from when the qualifiers will be done. So if we don't compete, if we don't beat these teams, we shouldn't go to the World Cup. In terms of formation, I don't know if we can play with two strikers, because both Ayman and Mimi don't know how to play with a second striker. So I think, I think Advocaat needs to focus on the playmaking aspect. What went wrong? Amir and Amari proved himself a lot in these two games. So he needs to find somebody to be like the Anish at Akram and start assisting to Ayman or Mimi. Jirwan could be a solution, but he really needs to focus the next month on this aspect and find solutions. Don't take a break for the next 3 weeks and then meet again and tie against Lebanon or UAE. You're not going to go to the World Cup like that.
Guys, thank you so much for your input today. I wanted us to actually sit and have an honest conversation about this, and you guys have been very, very honest in your opinions, and in sometimes a bit brutal, but sometimes we all need a reality check. So Hassan, Jabir, if we want to find you on social media, how do we do that?
You can find me on Instagram at yes2Iraq. So yes to Iraq. That's the charity Instagram page that we have. I don't have a personal page at this time.
And Laith?
You can find us on Soccer Iraq, but this is my time to shout out Yassine, who has done a stellar job in providing regular updates to the supporters on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram under Soccer Iraq. Yeah, he's been absolutely fantastic in the time that I've been very busy with work and family commitments. And even actually watching Iraq, I became a bit of a glory hunter over the last year or two for those reasons. But yeah, he's the man. He actually managed to get us a shout out on commentary on One Football. If you watched the English commentary, he got us a shout out through the fans voting Mimi in the team of the decade. So that was all down to Yassine's hard work.
Brilliant. Just on the note of Soccer Iraq on Twitter and Instagram, did you guys get a ton of racial abuse from the Iranian fans, or was it just my page?
We triggered the fans, but Hassan, I think you got them more than us. I looked through your Twitter. That was comedy.
It was a bombardment of just racial abuse left, right and centre. Like, I don't know how I fought the urge to say anything, but I'm so happy I did. Hassan Osama, you must have seen our Instagram page since you're the admin for there. It was pretty bad, wasn't it?
My friend, you have no idea. To this day. How many days has it been since the match?
Dude.
And you can see the DMs they're full, my friend.
Nice enough.
And what gets me is you see these guys, these are you can see their profile, these are professional looking guys with it's a grown man and he's making these ridiculous comments. It's kind of comical and you can't help but to laugh. But it is what it is.
You wouldn't have thought they've won the game by the amount of abuse we took. It's quite something.
It made me laugh because they said that they don't look at us as a rival. They look at us on the level of Bahrain. This was pre-match. And then it just shows you that it was all bottled up after the 5 meetings previous. That once they got that win, they took over.
Yeah, absolutely. We live in their heads rent-free. And Hassan Osama, if we want to find you, how are we going to do that?
Yeah, primarily on Twitter. at Hassan O_1193. Yeah.
Brilliant. And guys, if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Iraq Football Pod. If you want to hit our website, www.iraqfootball.me. And if you want to hit my personal account on Instagram, at Hassanan, Hassane. It's been an interesting chat. Thank you so much to my wonderful guests for joining us today. I hope we feel a little bit better come tomorrow or maybe a week's time or however long it takes to get over this result. But I'm sure things will get better, hopefully. And we will be back to preview the next 2 games at the start of October. Until then, guys, Yalla ya Iraq.